back for episode 3.
Excellent. It's good to be back for number 3.
There was a thing. Microsoft always got it right on the 3rd time.
That's right.
Kind of like their thing. So I think this episode's gonna be pretty good then.
I think so. Some people might say they got it right on the 3.1 time.
That's true. 3.1. Yeah. So probably about 10% into this, we'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. That's when it'll get really good.
The title of this episode is Peak Mobile.
Ooh.
We were talking about before we started recording. This is really about kind of that era of Windows Mobile where they were really shipping some pretty high volume units, relatively speaking. I mean, they were firing all cylinders, had the Palm Treo going, had the Blackjack, Motorola Q, like everything pre-iPhone, pre-Android.
It wasn't even a twinkle in Steve Jobs' eye, for all we know, or maybe it was. I don't know. Or Andy Rubin. Well, I guess Andy Rubin was already building Danger and Android on his own.
He was doing Sidekick at that point.
Sidekick, yeah. Paris Hilton.
There you go. Good.
That makes it worth buying that company.
That's a different episode.
Yeah.
No, so this is called Peak Mobile, and I was saying that, in a 9-part series, having episode 3 called Peak is probably not a good sign, but
I know. But I remember those days because it was really just us battling BlackBerry, mostly. We were still in that
little Symbian thing going on.
That whole business phone was still the thing. It was all about business and executives.
Still.
Look at you. Look at you. Wow.
Legit.
Sharing the love. And so you're right. The battle was happening in business class of airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
Grab those Blackberries out of those business class guys and put a blackjack in their hand or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
A dash.
Actually, I should probably save this for after the gear episode, gear segment, but there was some sort of legal issue with Samsung and calling it blackjack and Blackberry and,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I remember that.
Hey, whatever.
But it was
water under the bridge.
But you're right. But I remember sales were just really booming, and we were really kind of, I don't know if we equaled past BlackBerry. I don't know. There was ActiveSync was happening.
Yeah, it's like 2006, 2005 to 2007-ish, 2006, 2007.
That messaging that we had maybe was resonating. Hey, you don't have to have all this insane infrastructure like BlackBerry does.
That's right. Just Exchange.
To push email, just use Exchange.
Yeah.
Exchange was the cornerstone of everything.
Everything.
Who would have thought that an email server would be the cornerstone of anything?
And who was one of the key people at Exchange was Terry Myerson, who later took over Windows Phone. In a later episode, we'll talk, not Terry, but we'll talk to Joe about Windows Phone. But
it is ironic. But no one ever said MS Mail or Schedule Plus was going to be the cornerstone of anything. But maybe the foundation.
So to this day at Microsoft, if you tell someone you want to meet with them, you say, I'll send you an S Plus.
Yeah. You still got to do that.
If you're new to Microsoft, everyone's like, what are you talking about? It's like, Schedule Plus from like 20 years ago.
Yeah. Exactly. For some reason, I remember getting my first box, I'm like an IT person at a company I'm at, and getting MS Mail, Schedule Plus, and there was nothing inside. Do you have a memory of that? Like, you thought you were buying email software. I think that happened with Exchange. Remember when we called the Exchange email client Exchange for a while?
Right.
And people thought they were getting software, but they didn't. I think they downloaded it from the M drive. I don't know. Who knows?
Very confusing.
It is confusing.
I think we used to image it off the network, though. Didn't we do that?
It was something like that. Yeah.
Some weird little spinny character. Took forever.
Yeah.
Those are the days.
Go figure.
But we're gonna move on over, I think. Well, actually, before we go over to the gear, we've played some videos in the past few episodes, and we struggle a little bit to find Windows Mobile videos.
Yeah. It's hard.
We did find one that's pretty cool, and I think it embodies, the zeitgeist.
Oh, big word there. SAT word there, kids.
There you go.
Times. Yep.
1-800. Yeah, remember zeitgeist. So why don't we watch that one and then see what happens?
Awesome.
Here we go.
Agora, tô te mandando agora.
Agora qualquer lugar é seu escritório.
Com a Claro, você acessa
2
seus
megapixel
e-mails e
camera.
internet
Very
onde
nice.
estiver. Novo QTEC da Claro, o Windows no seu bolso.
Wow.
Well, there you go.
Did they take
Yeah.
a selfie way back then?
That was a selfie in 2004, maybe.
So maybe selfies were invented by Windows Mobile.
I think so. I think we have the evidence right there.
I think that was the evidence.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but that was the work life.
Yeah.
That he was like in the office, and then the walls came down. He was on the beach.
It was on the beach.
And one phone could do it all. You didn't need a BlackBerry plus a phone. You just needed
Right.
this one phone. That was their message.
That's amazing. Yes. Back to, like we've discussed before, how we'd have marketing posters inside our buildings where we worked. And one of them was just be responsive to your customer with email, with push email, with Active Sync. And you can do that. Like that was the thing.
Night.
Like I'm super responsive to my customers, or as they would say at Amazon, we're customer obsessed.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. That probably destroyed work-life balance forever, but hey.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Pretty much.
The old push email at 2 a.m, but
exactly. A lot of love.
All right.
there.
Well, why don't we move on to our gear friends? We're going over to the Mobile Phone Museum in jolly old England.
Excellent. We're hopping on the Concorde.
This won't hurt a bit, so just hang on. All right, here we are. We're going off to the museum again. Episode 3. We have Ben Wood and Matt Chatterley from the Mobile Phone Museum, and we're going to dig into some gear here, all the cool gear from that era. So, Ben and Matt, welcome.
Thanks very much for having us back, Pete.
Yeah, fantastic. So for those not super familiar with the Mobile Phone Museum, you guys are based in the UK and you have how many? 10 million phones or something? Or I don't know.
We have about 3,000 unique devices in the collection. You can see them all online at mobilephonemuseum.com. We have about 6,000 in total and growing all the time. So we're very happy to be here to share some of these cool devices from the Microsoft era.
Awesome.
Outstanding.
And last time, I think at the end of episode 2, we had a little teaser into the wonderful, weird world of Windows mobile phones and that era, which was like the MPx dual hinge. But now we're going to look at some more weirdness, I think, right?
Absolutely. I thought we'd start today with a phone that is seared into my memory.
Most weird.
And as soon as I show this to some
None
people,
more weird.
None more weird than this. I think one of the ugliest phones ever made, one of the weirdest phones ever made. And this is the Sierra Voke device, Sierra Wireless Voke, which was October 2003. And although at first glance, it looks like a kind of cell phone.
It looks like an everyday candy bar phone initially,
but it is a Frankenstein design. Look at that. You can flip it out. It was the era of the
my eyes.
It was the era of the Blackberry, and they had to do something. So Sierra Wireless was really well known for cellular data modules, PC cards, but they were looking to diversify. And this amazing device, this Frankenstein product, actually went on to win an award from the British Columbian Technology Industry Association as an excellence in product innovation. But I spoke to people who worked on this, and they said it was the result of a kind of too many chefs in the kitchen problem. They just ended up with something. They had an idea. They were horribly underfunded, and they had no idea really how to make phones. Yeah. So
it's a tough one. Yeah.
One of the tough things with this as well, which was a huge issue, was the balance on this device was awful. So when you opened it, the weight of it is all in the top of it. So literally you'd open it and it would you start typing on it and it would fly out of your hand. So that was a major, major challenge. It used Windows Mobile 2003. They had loads and loads of software problems because of the fact that the software was not really designed for a QWERTY keyboard and two-handed use. It was very much a one-handed use device. So it was kind of hacked together, because it just wasn't the right way to do it. So the performance was awful. And then they had all sorts of issues with the partner. So it's a really weird, built around a Siemens GSM module as well. So it really was a Frankenstein device. They did have some innovation, though. I mean, I will give it to them. They had this capability where they had a serverless corporate email solution, which was quite breakthrough at the time, and you could do kind of search. So it was kind of around the time that Bez was being deployed on BlackBerry. So it was an interesting breakthrough on the device category. But there's a brilliant story I want to share with you about this device, because I can't tell you how awful it was. And there's a very famous story of one frustrated user making a phone call on this device and it just crashing. The calls just got rejected. And actually, the story was that there was a call coming in. They tried to answer it. They couldn't answer the call. And they were so frustrated that they threw the phone out of their hand and it hit a lamppost. And while the phone remained intact, the lamppost ended up getting dented. So it was very well.
Yeah, that's quality craftsmanship. Yeah, I mean, back then, right, everyone was trying to figure out the recipe. I mean, today, obviously, everything's a slab, and we've sort of gotten to that normalized mode. But back then, like you said, there's QWERTY keyboards and wide keyboards, and then there was a lot of these, the candy bar phones. So it was like the Wild West, right? People would just try stuff and see what happened. So they
gave up pretty quick. They abandoned the whole thing in July 2005. They made, we're told, about 10,000 units. So, it's
in someone's garage. There's a pallet of those.
Yeah, and they'll be worth something now, because that's a relatively small volume these days. So if you've got one, it's a good story.
But we shouldn't be too hard on them, because the keyboard thing was ever present in people's mind. You've probably heard and read about all the arguments going on within Apple about launching the original iPhone. There were a lot of people inside Apple that said it absolutely has to have a keyboard. Yeah. So that was a big thing.
So if we carry on, then we ended up with a really nice product for. I remember being excited at the time for kind of the first Windows mobile smartphone device that came into the US and into Europe with the Orange network as well, and that was this product here. The Motorola MPx 200. So December 2003, I think this was announced. It was on AT&T, I think, in the US. It had Windows Mobile Smartphone 2002. Never got upgraded, which incensed the users, but it didn't have the memory to do it. It came from an ODM called Chi Mai, and we even have in the museum the original ODM sample here. So you can see, it was pretty much a white label device with even the battery has the engineering sample for saying that it's for the MPX.
Now, is this the first Motorola Windows mobile phone? Because that was a big coup to get Motorola onto the platform at the time.
This was a big thing for them, because they were, I think at the time, they were doing all sorts of stuff around Linux and all sorts of things. So to get them to embrace this was really important. So this phone sticks in my mind, and it was really nicely bundled with a cradle, it would all sync up. And it was an exciting product. It felt like a quality product when you were using it, reassuring click as you open it.
Also, it was a pretty, mainstream form factor. And I think that was one of the goals, was to get the platform into the mainstream form factor with the mainstream OEMs. I mean, it's great that Sierra Wireless made a phone, but when you get Motorola to make it, that's a real endorsement of the platform. So that was a big one.
It was big news, and it was the beginning of a run of commitment from Motorola. So we started with this, and then you remember in the last episode, the phone I teased you, which is still one of my favorite phones.
Oh yeah, this one's my favorite.
Came out of this, which is the Motorola MPx, the dual hinge device that you can see here. So we have, the standard, for people who missed this in the show last time, you have the clamshell device that you could use here. But then amazingly, through some brilliant mechanical engineering, you push this button and it released the hinge. So it was a dual hinge approach. Absolutely incredible engineering.
I thought whoever was in charge of designing the keyboard labels must have kind of gone nuts, because how do you label that keyboard in two different directions?
It's such a mess. I mean, actually, in terms of visual clarity,
shaped, because it's got to work both ways, the way a person expects it to. Can you imagine being an engineer or a designer put on this project, and your boss says, I need you to build a phone that does this and this.
So it had a stylus as well. So you had the resistive touchscreen in there. You had on this device, which was interesting, it was made by Compal, and they made a couple. So again, another ODM device that they shipped, and they made a couple of devices, had built-in Wi-Fi, which was a big deal as well. I mean, that was an important thing. because it was only GPRS, so it was pretty slow data rate. So that was exciting. 1.3 megapixel camera, which you can see there on the front, but announced at the same time as this rather ugly product, I always think, the MPx 100, also made by Compal. Pretty unremarkable.
Yeah, candy bar
device. Pretty thing. So this was Motorola. So they had these two. This device was quickly discontinued. It shipped in Asia, I think, for a little while, and then just got discontinued. Never really know what happened to it. I never got the full story. So if someone out there has the full story of this device, please get in touch.
And whoever designed that keyboard, please speak up.
That would be great.
Yes.
And then we end the Motorola story with the MPx 220, which was a kind of more refined version of the 200. And this was once again made by the same ODM as the 200. Nice enough device, and it had the software upgrade on it. So this brought Windows Mobile 2003 second edition. I think it launched with Singular in October 2004, and then came to Europe after that. So that's like the Motorola DN. Now other things came in the future. We'll talk about Moto Q and Moto Q9 and those sorts of things, more BlackBerry type devices later. But that's the Motorola story.
Yeah, that was big. So back then it was, you either had a candy bar or a flip phone, pretty much. Those were kind of your two big form factors.
They're the only,
and then and obviously a lot of experimentation, but getting those mainstream form factors, into the platform was pretty key. So that was interesting to see that evolution there.
Absolutely.
So that's 2004. They were the kind of key highlights there. Fast forward to the next year, 2005, and this product. So there you go. This is the Samsung SGH i300, which you can see
just rolls
here.
right off the tongue. I love that.
You have one of these, and I'm going to let you talk about this because there is something super unique about this product.
I know this phone was So first of all, candy bar form factor, but pretty cool. I mean, if you look at the side, the way the angle is on either side, like really neat industrial design. So it looked kind of fast and cool. And not too thick. I mean, it looks thick here these days, but back then this was pretty svelte. But the secret ingredient is this had a rotating hard drive inside. So, I remember, is it 3 gig or I don't know what it was, 30 megabytes. I forgot the size, but having a rotating, and you can almost sort of feel the gyroscopic effect a little bit when this thing was running, which is kind of weird. But it was amazing that they fit such a small rotating platter inside this thing with the battery.
Pete, with
as well. So if you dropped it, it wouldn't break. That was the most impressive thing about that was the way that they stored the data storage if it felt it was moving fast.
Maybe,
that's right. It had
maybe the gyro would help park the hard drive head. Does anybody remember parking the head of the hard drive?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So that's
with a spinning hard drive like that, maybe you could put 1,000 songs in your pocket. I don't know.
And that was super important because of the fact that we believe at the museum that is the first ever cell phone with a hard drive in it, and one of the last as well. But super important.
Yeah, really cool. That was a really fun device. And again, Samsung on the platform was a big deal. I mean, they weren't the juggernaut that they are today. But again, major brand, major OEM, major channels, getting them to, and then the first of many Samsung phones, some good and some bad, but this was one of the really good ones.
You're absolutely right, Pete. It felt like an important time for the platform because you'd gone from kind of these, Sendo didn't happen, but it was a name no one had heard of. Then you had, carrier branded stuff like the SPV, which we talked about, which was Orange branded. No one knew about HTC. No one knew who that was. All of a sudden, boom, Motorola get behind the platform. Huge win. Samsung get behind the platform. Huge win. And then, of course, the HTC brand starts to emerge slowly but surely. And that probably brings us on to one of the last devices I've got for this segment, which is quite an interesting one, which lots of people will know by lots of different names. So this is the general name for this product. The kind of generic HTC name for this particular product was the HTC Universal, and it had this kind of rotating, extraordinary this device and design. But it was also known as the QTech 9000, the iMate Jazz Jar, the Vodafone VPA, the O2 XDA Executive, the Orange SPV M5000. They spun this into so many different carriers.
Yeah.
And this is
a
the
lot of mileage on that one.
T-Mobile MDO4 as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
there you go.
You could get rid of your laptop if you had this phone.
Well, that's the thing. It had a decent sized keyboard, quite a decent sized keyboard, and the other form factor at the time was just the PDA form factor. So think about Palm Pilots and things like that. And so this tried to take that PDA form factor and bring it into the phone world in a way that made sense, and especially with that keyboard, it's pretty cool. You were a super geek if you had one of those things.
And you could do portrait and landscape, so you could flip it around, and you could have it as a device where you could have it kind of like just that standard PDA, but then you had that whole ability to have the keyboard as well, which was
I really liked mine. I think mine was black with the red keys glowing. It looked so cool.
There you go.
It looked so cool.
iMate was one of those cool they weren't Samsung or Motorola, but they had their own vibe. And I remember visiting them. I think it was in Dubai. I think they were headquartered in Dubai. They were living large in Dubai.
They were, they were.
That's awesome.
Now there's one more device which doesn't fit into this time space, but I think it's a good one to talk about, and it's one that Rob mentioned on the last call. So let me just grab that device for you. Hang on just a second. And this device is the HTC Advantage. Now, Rob, you've got a story about. So this is, I want to be very clear. This is a product from 2007, but you can see the DNA. And I think it's one that goes quite well side by side with this. So I thought it was a good one to drop in before we kind of wrap up today. So, Rob, you had a story. We were talking about this, and you used this in a particular way, right?
I did. When you're doing lots of presentations and speaking at conferences, you're always trying to find new ways to be better than you were the last time. And so, the best presenters, I would take the whole thing out of the leather case because it would kind of hook on there. And so we always had so many great presenters at Microsoft, and some of these engineers who would sit there and they just put up Notepad and they just start typing what the presentation was, and people are blown away. How could I do that? Well, with that device, it has a VGA dongle that comes with it, and it connects to the side of there. And so I did a whole hour-long presentation at, I don't know if it was at Microsoft Tech Ed or whatever. And I would plug it in and have it projected on the screen. And I was writing out stuff. I was showing PowerPoint off of that device through the VGA. And then I did some freehand drawing and stuff like that to design, mobile architectures. And it was a huge hit. People couldn't believe that you had a device like that.
Yeah.
It was a game changer.
Very, very expensive. And as you say, it does have that VGA out port on the side, which was amazing.
So
really
another laptop killer.
There you go.
And it's not another case, huh?
Yeah.
So that was
you got to have a leather case. I mean,
Of course, yeah. Great device. Absolutely.
Awesome.
Not very practical.
Very important era at this particular moment.
No,
kind of big OEMs coming in, some devices that looked like phones, Windows, Windows kind of mobile arriving, the smartphone edition arriving. Real big important moments.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you, Ben and Matt, for this episode again. Trip down memory lane. I think we all who are fans of the platform or worked on the platform or involved have our kind of drawer full of phones, but obviously nothing that compares to your collection. So I encourage people to go to mobilephonemuseum.com, check out more, and stay tuned for our next episode where we go even further into the Windows Mobile world. Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Cheers, Pete.
Hey, y'all.
Back.
We are back.
Hello.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yes, exactly. We just came back from jolly old England.
I almost forgot about the other thing that they were talking about. Characteristic of this era was not only was Windows Mobile getting some traction, but the form factors were kind of nuts.
Yeah,
like that Sierra Wireless and of course the MPx.
I can see how the balance of that Sierra Wireless, when you pulled it out there and you think you're just going to type away on it, and it kind of goes, Yeah, I hate that.
People struggle with keyboards. But yeah, that was the thing. Like keyboard was the thing because BlackBerry was the king of the mountain. And so everyone was trying to figure out a better way to do keyboard.
Yeah.
And, ironically, of course, when the iPhone came out, they sort of said no keyboard. And that's, we'll save that video of Steve Ballmer for that episode. But
right. That's always a classic.
But yeah, no, it was an amazing set of devices back then. And, and the volumes were there to support the innovation. Like, someone like Sierra or whoever could do a device. And, I think they said they peaked at about 25 million a year or something, which today seems like nothing. But
right. It was a big deal.
Back then,
yeah.
Pretty big chunk.
And we saw not one, but two laptop killers in that video there. I mean, gosh. Who needs a laptop when you got that big old keyboard and that giant screen?
The Jazz Jar, of course.
The Jazz Jar, How many laptops have been made where it does that? Or it flips all the way over and can show the screen in the opposite direction like a tent?
How many times?
HTC.
Can't even count. I've run out of fingers and toes. Well, also at that time, there was a few of these phones, and we'll see it later with Windows Phone. I forgot the code name, but the Nokia phones had this thing where you could hook it up as your PC.
Yes.
Remember that?
That's cool.
Samsung still has that, I think, too. Some sort of desktop mode.
Yeah, they do. Samsung. Yeah, right. The Galaxy devices. I've used it before, in fact.
Yeah.
And it works pretty well.
The big issue with those things, everyone said, oh, well, you'll take your phone with you on the road and you won't need to take your laptop and you just hook it up to your TV in your hotel room, blah, blah. And it's like, well, where's the keyboard? Like, oh, you need to bring your keyboard with you too. It's like, well, okay, well, if I'm bringing my keyboard, why don't I just bring my laptop? Yeah.
Well, remember, Samsung, we have to give them credit. We give too much love to the iPhone and not enough to Samsung. They invented the phablet.
That's true.
The Galaxy Note, biggest phone ever, and with it was a stylus, but not really. It was kind of a
phone tablet phablet. Yes.
The pen was electric and doing some crazy stuff. We watch launches from the Apple all the time. We watched just one just recently, and half of the deal was about their magic pen, which is kind of like a stylus.
Still chugging on that pen. There was also a laptop around this time, maybe slightly later, but it was maybe it was an Android era. Okay, but it was a laptop shell that you snapped your phone into or something. Remember that Motorola?
Like that. Yes, I do. Yeah, I remember that. That was pretty cool. People were trying lots of stuff. But the volume supported it, and it was early innovation. And as we saw from the last episode, kind of drove the developers nuts for all these different. Yeah, and I had to prove that Pocket PowerPoint on that one device with the VGA would actually work, and you could do a presentation, and it did. We were not full of it when it came to you got the Office right there with you on your device.
Yeah. Hence that Claro ad, right?
Hence the Claro ad. You
actually selfie on the beach.
Yeah.
Check your email.
Amazing. Who needs to go to the office?
Life is good.
Life is good. We invented the selfie. We killed work-life balance, but we also led to the work from home and work from anywhere trend, which we live in today.
That is true.
So thank you.
Thank you. That's right. You're welcome. Why don't we move on to our special guest? Todd Warren is our special guest today. And for those Todd was at Microsoft for a long time, and he'll talk about kind of his origin story. But he ran engineering basically during the Windows Mobile era. And there was a lot going on. There was a lot of versions, and we had the embedded stuff, and so he's going to talk about kind of that whole era of what was going on, getting the Treo business and adapting things and stuff. So why don't we zippity zip over to Todd land?
Awesome. It turns out you need engineering to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah, the typing on the keyboard is important.
Yeah, that's weird stuff there. Yeah, it's not all PowerPoint, is it?
That's right. The PowerPoint compiler.
Right.
Okay, let's go visit our friend Todd. Here we go. We just want to welcome you, Todd Warren, to the show here. This is episode 3. So for those of us joining along, hopefully you've seen episode 1 and 2. And this is episode 3, and Todd is our special guest. Todd was the head of engineering, corporate vice president of Microsoft. And so, Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Happy to be here. Fun to talk about the olden days. So,
Yes.
and a place where I got a lot of arrows in my back, I would say, as a pioneer. Many scars.
It was a long
There are
time
many
ago,
scars
20
through the
years
period
ago
of my
plus.
career.
Yeah.
Oh my
But now
God.
you started at Microsoft in the 80s, right? I mean, just
Yeah,
kind
I
of
started. So I was at Microsoft 21 and a half years. I started in 1987. I was a program manager on the assembler. So,
Wow.
Rob, I'm sure knows what an assembler is.
I do.
Hopefully Pete does too.
We
Do you ever
can't get
use
it to work
Mashup,
in the
Rob?
browser. Just
What's
a
that?
little bit.
Well, no,
Just-
there's WASM now. There's
that's true.
WebAssembly.
That's
So,
good. You're right.
You can run, there's web containers. I mean, you can do a lot.
That's
in the
pretty
browser.
cool.
Yeah. So, do you ever use Masm, Rob?
No, I never did.
No, and
I
I
know.
did. So the first thing, I didn't work on this. It was such an interesting time at Microsoft because Microsoft 1987 was about 1,100 people. And so the macro assembler product, the product team was basically me as a PM, and it was only half my time was on MASM. And then there were two developers. The lead developer was Steve Zach, and there was kind of an assistant developer, Mike Hobbs, who were on it. But they did a bunch of work to really simplify and make it much easier to write assembly code. But the thing I'm most proud of from that period of my time that I worked on was we did a lot of work on debugging. And so, how people debug data structures, like even the way that stuff's displayed in the JavaScript browsers, most of that stuff was copied from CodeView, which was the debugger that we worked on then. So,
Okay.
So that was the first thing I worked on. And so I worked in DevTools for a while, and then I moved into product management, and I was in product management on Exchange, actually on Microsoft Mail before it became Exchange. It was just so. Little known fact, Microsoft entered the mail business on the Macintosh. We had a server that ran as a desk accessory. So, it was very efficient. It was client server, but we didn't enter the PC market that way because networks weren't homogeneous enough. We entered with a so-called shared file product.
Yes, I feel like my flashbacks to MS Mail was a Novell network, and you had to map. Was it an M drive or something like that?
M drive to a file, and then you would run these PCs that would act like servers. But we were working on the thing that became Exchange during that period.
That's cool.
And then I worked in the Windows NT group for a while on Windows NT4, some things around the option pack, which were when IIS was introduced. And this thing called the Small Business Server was a product I did, which was a pretty interesting product for its time. I mean, now you just use the web and the cloud, but then we had small businesses stick servers under desks and connect them with the USR robotics modems, which is kind of how I'm connected to this. We had some connection problems before we got started, and it's because I'm on a USR modem.
And now people with the computer under the desk can say they're doing edge computing or something sexy like that.
Sure. Well, now what you have to do is you have to be running your LLM model on your edge computer.
That's right. Yes,
you do.
Exactly.
That's
You're right.
Locally.
So, I'm not doing that yet, but I was just talking to a friend who is doing that. So, let's see, and so from there, they asked me to come be the GM of Microsoft Project, which I did for a few years, and that was really fun. And then, frankly, I resigned from Microsoft. I was going to leave, and Steve Ballmer talked me off the ledge and said, "Hey, Jim Ulchin has a couple of different things that you could look at and do." And one of those was taking Bill Vecti's spot as the GM of the Embedded Operating System Group. And I thought, well, this is a pretty unique thing to be able to run a whole end-to-end operating system group. Like the nice thing about Project, it was kind of an independent business that you ran. And embedded was that way for a while. And I thought, well, that's kind of a unique thing. And so, I went over and we were doing Windows CE, and then Pete Wilson was working in the Windows group doing XP Embedded with David D'Souza. And I was working with them. Sorry, my phone was going crazy. We were marketing Windows CE and embedded operating systems. And the big thing we were trying to do there, a big strategic theme, I would say, of the early 2000s at Microsoft was there was a lot of defense being played against all these device categories. So, and what I learned is the mission of the embedded group was really to play defense. And so we were trying to prevent consumer electronics makers from implementing an alternative on Linux. So we figured out some ways to redo. CE was a pretty neat thing at the time in the sense that it was kind of a Lego building block approach to putting an operating system together. You had this thing called Platform Builder where you could pick a kernel and what things you wanted to layer on top, and then you would get an operating system out the back end, which was kind of a neat idea that Mark Miller and Larry Morris and a bunch of other guys had done. And we said, well, let's go look at consumer electronics categories and what things are happening and sort of how to refactor it. And the thing that I knew is I was like, gosh, you can't just provide a bunch of operating system bits. People in the end are going to want to try to build a device that's trying to accomplish something. Often when I think about the phone market, I come back to a graph that a guy named Scott Horn put together.
I remember Scott.
He's a CMO. I forget what company he's at now, but he's still doing great things. But he put together this chart that talked about where we were looking at what was happening with processors, and especially the ARM ecosystem was developing super rapidly. The MIPS guys sort of screwed up by letting people change the instruction set when they licensed it out. But what ARM did that was much smarter was the architectural licenses required you to keep things the same. And so they had a much more homogeneous ecosystem of people doing silicon around
developers.
ARM. Yeah. And in particular, they had people like Qualcomm that were also good at modems. Now, one of the best low power silicon guys actually started on MIPS, but they were acquired by this Cupertino company, and I can't remember the name of the company. I remember the name of the company that acquired them. I can't remember the original name of the company. And then they switched to ARM, and that worked out pretty well for end users and that particular company. But in any case, ARM ecosystem was really growing rapidly, and so we did this thing like, okay, so what consumer? This is 2006, maybe 2000, earlier than that, 2004. And we said, by 2007 or 8, what are going to be the big devices? And we went over, mobile was not in the embedded group. And we went over and we talked to this guy, Juha Christensen, who was running marketing at that point. And Juha had all these huge numbers for how big the phone market was. And they were so big, in fact, the numbers, we did not believe the numbers, us Windows guys.
Right.
And we said, well, maybe it's sort of big. And I think we cut them down 10%. And still, of that pie chart, the size of the phone market, running 32-bit high-level operating system capable machines was way over 50% of the whole market. Game consoles, so a market where we were spending a lot of money at the time, was about 10% of the consumer units out there. PCs were like 20-25%. Then set-top boxes, I think, was the next one. But it was pretty clear it's pretty clear even then that the phone was going to be able to run a computer, and it was going to be pretty big. So it was going to be pretty big. And we were working on phones. That was let's see, the mobile devices group. I think Kevin Shields was running it at that point. We were working together, sometimes productively, sometimes in that guns out way that that famous Microsoft cartoon show.
Yes.
So we're together. I love Kevin. Kevin's terrific guy. We merged all that stuff together in a single organization under Peter Canuck. And kind of at that point, they asked me to go do some things in automotive. We were talking about some automotive things because I've been toiling in that area a little bit in the last 4 years. Another really good guy named Chin started to run the embedded and mobile operating system group. But it was really, we realized that mobile was where we needed to go with the operating system. And that while this embedded stuff was interesting, it wasn't going to really have the revenue and business impact that you could if you focused on mobile phone.
Right.
And we had tried some things, like I talked about those different vertical categories. We looked at doing a better set-top box stack, but Microsoft had this big TV business that didn't really work out. Part because the standards didn't go their way, and they had a hard time convincing it. Always taking basically, I would say a big issue Microsoft had in the market is for all the device categories except Xbox. We stuck with the Windows business model, and there really was not much of an appetite to change from that business model.
Interesting.
And wasn't always the right approach for each market. Now, we did some pretty interesting things, like this device. When I became responsible for embedded in 2001, this device, the iPod, was pretty popular then. And we were doing this thing called Place for Sure. That was pretty differentiated, and there were a bunch of stores, and we had this player, and there were a few Windows machines out there, and so that was kind of a nice strategic entry point. And we worked with the Media Center guys, and we did this thing called the Portable Media Center. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember the Portable Media Center.
So that was a super fun product to work on. Amazing team. That's one of those teams I work with. We still have a reunion dinner every 5 or 6 years.
Oh, that's great.
That product. So, and then they took it and added Wi-Fi and made it brown, and now it's sort of the butt of the line. So not saying there. I think the UI that was done for that was better than the UI before. There were a lot of great ideas in putting that forward. It was a little bit too late, I think. Was the issue. Like, it was pretty clear things were moving to the phone already at that point. But it was a good effort that a lot of great people worked on. So then about that, so I toiled in the automotive realm for a while. Chen went back to China. So then Peter asked me to look at mobile and embedded together, and he had started this transition away from the embedded business, and we sort of accelerated it forward and really moved the embedded stuff out so that we could focus on mobile. And we had and at that point the team had already won Palm, so we were starting to work with Palm. We were trying to launch this product, the Motorola Q. And it's interesting. In my consulting now, I have some slides that talk about the cautionary tale of Motorola in software. So Motorola was interesting at that point. They were doing they were partnering with Apple on the Rocker. They were licensing Symbian. They were implementing, Windows on a phone with a team that was spread across the world. There were 3 little software teams trying to collaborate across geographies. And gee, they were really wondering why they couldn't get that queue across the line, given that structure. The other thing that was amazing at that time is all up in operating systems. I think Microsoft had about, if you put the Windows Mobile team plus the Windows team together, that was about 2,000 or 3,000 software engineers and related disciplines like program managers and testers. Motorola had 6,000 people working on software.
Oh my God.
So,
I had no idea.
6,000 people. Wow. And they had a lot of share. They did a bunch of great products, they were number 2. But once your category becomes software defined, you have to really simplify the focus of your hardware. And that was something that was always a big challenge. Even in the days that I was in Windows Mobile, there was a lot of work in Windows Phone to simplify a lot of these things. And the team did some interesting things there. But because of that, we were able to work with companies to do some pretty interesting devices. Like we worked working with Palm to do the Treo. They wanted to do some things that were a little bit Palm unique. And they had a nice keyboard in their own apps. They were always worried about us because they were still doing Palm, the Palm OS apps, and they were just starting to do the Web OS. I only learned recently, I talked to one of the guys, actually the guy who launched Web OS, but I guess they also went through their thing where they threw it all away and rewrote the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah, so
I guess it was like we had OEMs back then that were like you mentioned, Motorola, Samsung with the Blackjack, Treo. Some pretty hot phones. HTC. I think HTC was the only one at the time though that was taking a dependency on Windows Mobile. The others were.
We taught them how to debug separate operating systems so they could bring that expertise to Android. So,
oops. What was that relationship like with HTC? We did so much with them.
Oh, it was a great relationship. Peter Chen, who was the head of HTC at that time, was really they were a fantastic guy. I think we probably undervalued it. We kind of wanted to. I don't know if this is a cool analogy or not, but we wanted to date what we thought were the more popular OEMs like Samsung and Motorola. But HTC was really doing a lot of very interesting designs, and versus those other guys who had mostly done feature phones. So what we would have pejoratively called then dumb phones versus smartphones.
Right.
They didn't really understand the value of software as well as HTC did. And HTC, a lot of that core engineering team had come from HP and had worked originally on the iPad before they moved over there. And so they were very good at understanding how to integrate our operating systems onto the device and build the supporting software to get it done.
And also back then, I think there was a lot more mobile operator influence on the handsets.
Well, yes, that was the thing. Apple, because they built this great consumer asset with music and the iPod, they were really able to bargain that away from the mobile operators. And as powerful as Microsoft was, the only real asset we could bring to bear in the mobile operator world was mail-in exchange. So, everything else at the time either wasn't mobile applicable or it was anemic. So, Messenger had a lot of people, but not in the US. And so maybe we could have done something in Europe, but the MSN guys were trying to build an independent business. So, you couldn't do something that leveraged that.
Yeah. Right. You mentioned something kind of in our pre-show discussion around, why was Microsoft successful in Xbox but not in mobile? Which is an interesting question. I mean, what's your take on that? There's some obvious differences, but I
definitely understand that. I mean, I think one of the things, Jay and Robbie were very effective at carving out a skunkworks project and smart about not taking a bunch of dependencies on taking smart dependencies on things within Microsoft. So they took DirectX, but if it didn't work, they built it themselves. The other thing that I think was true is from a business model perspective, they really went with the gaming business model as opposed to trying to do some OEM thing. They do, like in some of the Xbox histories that have been written, they do talk about how early on they went out and did try to get some people to
build things,
and everybody laughed at them. And so, which certainly was my experience sometimes selling embedded operating systems alone before we worked on phone. Then Microsoft made a bigger strategic commitment to it. Now, I have probably a very controversial take to your Thanos, like if you could change one thing, and I should caveat this with Kahneman's thing about when was the undoing. When something goes wrong, everybody's like, when was the decision made that really
right? What was the turning point?
And my conclusion was, if you were to pick, if you're sitting there in 99 or 2001, and you could pick a project to invest in and do hardware, do you do a phone or do you do a game console? And you can only do one. Which one do you do? So, probably a phone was a bigger market. But that was not the choice that was made. We did go, many people did. We were not, Peter and Susan and I were not the first people to pitch this at the time at Microsoft, but and of course it got pitched later and was accepted. But to pitch, buying a handset company to get into the hardware business, so that you could do a hardware business model. And so we very seriously pitched and had, my understanding from Kevin Shields had been pitched before. We pitched acquiring HTC, and it was a very serious discussion. HTC at that time would have been about $1 billion to buy. And I think it was before they had committed to Android, and that might have made a difference. Unfortunately, that was also the same quarter we lost $2 billion building Xboxes. And so there was not a lot of appetite for another hardware play at Microsoft.
So, makes sense. Yeah, it's a big bet. I mean, we're talking about Surface was a similar kind of, probably a big bet to, invest in that business, and sort of at that time that was taking on, HP, Dell, and Lenovo as an existing OEM ecosystem. And but that's an interesting one. We've heard that before, is like sort of, especially from a phone perspective. I mean, as you know, these embedded platforms and devices are very engineering intensive. They're not just take a reference design and put some software on it. There's a lot of and so being able to design the hardware and the software from the ground up, fully integrated, there's definitely an advantage to that.
Especially at that point in the market. I think that was that, but I don't know. We probably would have done a keyboarded device, and so we would have had to do the same pivot we had to do later. We had 2 platforms. That was complicated. So we needed to merge the platforms, and we kept putting that off because it was expensive.
So there was like the Pocket PC kind of PDA platform, and then there was the Windows Mobile phone platform.
There was a Windows Mobile phone platform that had no touch experience, was keyboard only.
Right.
and pretty simplified device. And then there was a thing that had grown out of, kind of the Palm Pilot,
PDA world.
Pocket PC world of the Pocket PC
Mm.
software, PDA world, that had a phone on it. I mean, in some sense, it's funny. I don't really know what the end Windows Phone was built on. I mean, originally, I know they switched to the NT kernel. I don't know if that gave them that much speed, but that's neither here nor there. It's a great kernel. I love working on the NT team. Love people on NT.
Right.
But most users don't care much about your kernel.
Right. That's a good point.
But yeah, you're right. There was a kind of a duality of platforms there too, which
well, yes. So we needed to bring those together. We knew when the iPhone came out, that we needed to do capacitive touch. That was different. And we knew we needed to bring a full browser there. And so then all of a sudden things got very difficult.
Yes, and as we know, browsers are very tricky.
The browser was tricky, and in particular, the thing that was tricky about the IE code base, there were two things that were tricky about the IE code base. Well, first, they were fighting their own battle, right? So, as we talked about earlier before the recording went on, Chrome's a pretty dominant browser then, but it was not such a dominant browser in 2004. This thing called Internet Explorer was pretty dominant.
Right. Yes.
But Chrome was coming out, and they really had to fight that battle. And they were not so interested in helping make it work on mobile. And the other thing is, because IE was an older code base, it had really and it had been an issue in the mobile platform for the Mozilla platform as well. Those browsers were built for Intel processors that had floating point, and so there was a lot of floating point code in there. And look, it's a simple matter of programming. You can substitute it out, but it's a bunch of work. And when Ari Jassky at Nokia decided to open source this great rendering engine that Nokia had built called WebKit, it turned out it made it a lot easier for folks like Android and Apple to build a pretty good browser, because it removed a lot of the floating point dependencies and had some good leverage for rendering to build the web skin around. And we looked at going to WebKit, but we were worried that and probably this was a wrong decision. Certainly in retrospect, it was a wrong decision because things had to be redesigned so much for mobile. We thought, gosh, what are we going to lose if we don't have the same rendering engine? Like, we have access to the rendering engine that was the dominant rendering engine and code base on the web. And so it's like we should adapt that, except that was very costly to do from a dependencies point of view. And then presentation system, I would say the worst decision I made was betting on Silverlight versus doing a browser-based application model, which was what actually, that alone would not be enough to save you. Palm did that, and clearly they're not around. So, but they had a much better application model than Windows Phone ended up.
Yeah.
So,
I remember that weird time you'd had all this .NET Compact Framework kind of WinForms looking apps out there, and then we tried to do Windows Mobile 7 a few times, before going to Windows Phone. And do we have backwards compatibility to those old NetCF apps, or do we go to Silverlight? Or I just remember lots of discussion back then. It felt like
that was a tough one.
How to proceed, the developer community,
Yeah.
Hindsight's 2020.
Sure.
I mean, there's a big gap between 6.1 and Windows Phone. So the question is, could you have done? Who knows? It wasn't done, but it seems like the processor was powerful enough. You could have done a CF emulator, and then you might have been able to keep some developers on board. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. If
the vertical market.
I think the judgment was the experience wasn't going to be good, and would still look crummy compared to Apple. But the question is, some experience, some dev mind share versus no mind share. But it's impossible to run the experiment. So
yeah, exactly.
True.
Exactly.
True. You're right.
Yeah, but I mean, I think with the that era of Treo, Q, Blackjack, I mean, I think the run rate got up to 20 million or so annually. It was pretty big, and
it did. We beat Blackberry in the last couple quarters before.
Yeah, right.
Before I left, so
and I mean, the other thing too was more.
I
mean, the other thing was the target at the time. We were talking to John Trainer the other day. Was like the target was very much Blackberry, and
absolutely.
And the business was built on. We were talking about this earlier today. Like back then, if you had a smartphone or a PDA, you were either a business person or a pretty serious geek. Like you clipped it to your belt or something, and so it was not a mainstream consumer thing at the time for lots of reasons. And so appropriately, Microsoft was like, hey, we got Exchange. We've got our assets in the enterprise world, and we're going to run the table on this thing. And Apple approached it from a different way because they had to, because they didn't have those assets.
No, well, they had different assets.
Different assets, right?
They had the music asset, which was a great consumer asset.
Yeah.
They did do the browser, which you would think Microsoft would have been able to do, but that particular point in time, we were not able to do the browser well.
Well, it was a bit of an innovator's dilemma, like on the browser side. So,
pardon me?
Bit of an innovator's dilemma on the browser side because of the commitment around IE and the code base.
The commitment around IE. Now, there's more to it than that. I mean, one of the things that made the iPhone was because it had the big screen and it had the touch interaction model. It was better set up for browsing than the Windows devices of the time. So
true. It's better in that regard. Yeah.
So I mean, like the first HTC Android phone also had a decent browser. It was a terrible to use product.
Yes,
I remember that thing.
It was the one with the chin on it. I think it had a little angle to it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it had an angle. The hardware was okay. The software was super buggy. So for Android 1, but they fixed it. So it got a lot better. So Microsoft
those were the early adopter markets are very forgiving, right? So
it's interesting to think that for at least for a moment in time, HTC was the leading Android OEM.
They were
before Samsung built the Galaxy.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, and they did a great job. They had good operator relationships. They were starting to build their own brand at the time. And I think having worked with Samsung, those guys are relentless. And I think very serious about quality and design and all the different pieces. We would go to these meetings where we work on Windows phones, and they would just keep pulling out new concepts that they had taken all the way to hardware. So they'd say, well, what do you think about this keyboard device? And what do you think? And then they pull out this other one. What do you think about this one? What do you think about this one? They'd have like 10 different designs. Wow. And no other OEM was doing it that way.
Right.
Doing so many things to full prototype as Samsung. OEMs we were working on. So they were throwing a lot of stuff against the wall to see if it stuck. And it was pretty good stuff. It was each one was pretty good. So
I think Samsung too, part of it is, they the PC market sort of passed them by as a device builder. I mean, they had PCs way back in the day, but they were undifferentiated. And so I think when the phones came around, they were like, this is our platform. This is where we're going to.
And they were already in the feature phone business. Like they had
they had the channel, business. They had the mobile operator relationships, they had it all. They were spending a ton of marketing money anyway. So this was kind of theirs to lose, frankly, in terms of a market. But it's fascinating. So any other kind of closing thoughts? I guess one of the things we're trying to do when we talk to folks about this is like for people that are building products today, building businesses today, I mean, you mentioned some of the things there. There's obviously different strategic decisions that can be made, but what are the big takeaways that you would give people today building products and businesses that you learned out of this whole?
Well, I think especially if you're doing a software-enabled product, one of the key things is to realize you need to move to a platform business. So a key piece we work on actually at Invorso, where I do consulting, is a challenge we see, and for instance, we see this in the traditional automotive OEMs. So you have this broad product line, you have a chief car engineer who's really trying to differentiate that particular automotive product. And what ends up happening to the software teams is they end up fragmenting into doing specific things for each of the different product lines. And then you don't get the leverage that you can really get out of software for doing a common platform that works across everything.
Right.
And so figuring out how to get simplicity in your product line design so that you can get leverage out of the software platform you build. Yeah, that's kind of the key thing. And then the other thing is figure out this is an obvious thing, but what experiences you're going to hang your hat on. Like what's the thing that you can do that no one else can do? For us it was email, and so that was why we were gaining against Blackberry. But once broader than email came, we didn't pivot as well to
didn't have the
taking advantage of some of those things. So
cool.
Good stuff.
Well, Todd, I really appreciate going down memory lane here. This is fascinating, and hopefully for our listeners as well. And keep doing interesting things, and really appreciate the time.
You bet. It was a fun time, and a great bunch of people to work for. So
absolutely, those were great times for sure.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Todd. Interesting. Wow. Yeah, Todd was right in the mix there, and a lot of factors at play. Trying to keep that train going, and he mentioned about like the IE code base and having to use that, and even though WebKit was out, and it's tough because it was interesting because I think Windows Mobile, and I think we had mentioned this earlier too, the team, I could tell you being in the phone business at Microsoft, it was sort of like you were in this little weird little area, not Windows, but Windows Mobile. Never heard of it. So it was like, so they wrote a lot of their own stuff, right? They wrote their own version of Office, right? The Office team didn't write Office for the phone. It was written by the mobile team. And so
see how easy it is to write Office? I mean, anybody can do it.
No big deal. Editing some text. But it was tough, and they had to keep the features up and all this stuff. So there was a lot of self-reliance built into the team itself. And then when it came to these making other bets on other parts of the company, it was really tough because the other parts of the company, they didn't make mobile like their top priority.
Right.
But there was still a need and a kind of a desire to sort of leverage a lot of that stuff. So Todd was in a tough spot, I think, he had a lot of stakeholders, as we would say.
I think that's the best word. The stakeholders, they were all over around him. You're trying to do your best work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I found this video, by the way, because I think one of the things Todd also brought up was like, what was that moment, where, could have gone one way, could have gone the other way. One of the things we're going to keep coming back to is hardware. Yeah. And, of course, we have the Mobile Phone Museum, and Ben has it. Yeah. And then we'll talk a lot about this with Jay Allard in a future episode too, is, the importance of building hardware. And several points in time, I think even Peter Canuck said it in episode 1, we had gotten into the hardware business, would have been a different story. I have a clip from Steve Ballmer.
All right.
Let me play this, and then we can talk about it a little bit.
Cool.
There we go.
The things I'd do differently, of course. Like what? Come on, Charlie. I probably would have started us doing hardware earlier so that we could have been more effective in the phone business. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like an IQ test. Should Microsoft have a position in the phone business? Yes. The two most profitable companies. We were the number one most profitable company in our business for a long time. Right. Two guys have passed us, and they both did it by making phones, Apple and Samsung. So, I mean, I don't think software was the right play there, but the two most profitable companies now in our business are Apple, Samsung, Microsoft. Right. For years, it was Microsoft and some other guys. Yeah. So do I wish we had done that sooner? Of course I do.
Then why didn't you?
When the name of your company is Microsoft and your formula works, our formula was working. We were software guys. Bill Gates told Paul Allen when Paul first wanted to do hardware back in the 70s, we are software guys. So for us, it was kind of a religious transformation. And you could say we always had a little hardware. We had a mouse. We did the Xbox.
Right. A little hardware.
The big step was doing the Surface. Surface was our big step. We bought Nokia even after that. But the big step was doing Surface. And it, I love our partners. I love HP. I love Dell. I love Lenovo and the like. But the truth is, there are things you can do, and you can be more complete in your vision. Your feedback loop is tighter. Customers are telling you what they like and don't like much more quickly. And I don't regret our journey, and I don't regret the fact we're tremendously profitable by making operating system software for PCs. But relative to new form factors, like the phone was new to us, I should have moved us faster.
Wow.
Great question from Charlie Rose. So why didn't you?
Why didn't you do it? Well, I don't know. I was talking to Peter and Susan and Todd, and they wanted me to do it. But the Xbox was losing money like crazy, even though years later I'll talk about how awesome the Xbox turned out to be because, revisionist history, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, we heard that too. It's like Xbox was kind of, bleeding some money. And so it was tough to get commitment to the phone business. But, that seemed to be a recurring theme, is that getting into the business. The thing we'll talk about too when we get to the Kinzoon episode 5, which is interesting. I mean, talking to Jay is always interesting, but, he was always about hardware. I mean, he was the father figure of the Xbox or whatever, patriarch. Right. And it was about building a silicon to service, metal to cloud experience that included hardware. And that was always his shtick. And, and we brought that shtick to Kin and to Zune and to Xbox, but never to Windows Mobile until we bought Nokia. And then it was kind of a cocktail Michigas over there. But, so it'll be interesting, it was interesting that now Steve in this clip was sort of like, we should have built some phones.
Yeah.
I think it was totally unrelated to this, but when Steve retired, I don't know if were you there when he retired in 2014? Were you at the company?
I was.
Yeah,
I was still there.
You remember he sent out this email. I don't remember this part. He sent an email to the whole company wide, blah, 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 and someone replied. Someone replied all.
Oh,
and the only
replied all at Microsoft.
The question was, what's the backstory? That was the whole email. So he meant to send it, I think, to someone else, but it went to Microsoft all 120,000 of us.
Oh my God.
Steve Ballmer's retirement email. What's the backstory? That was hilarious. I think they've since invented a feature in Exchange that prevents that from happening, but
we definitely have our stories of email storms or whatever we called them.
That's right. Reply all. Stop replying all.
Stop replying all. Get me off of this list. How do I get on here?
How do I get on? I don't do that anymore.
Oh my God.
But no, I thought Todd was very insightful in what he was talking about. And like I said,
he saw a lot of things.
A lot of respect. But this whole era was, peak mobile. I mean, we were cooking with gas and didn't quite know what was coming down the pike. Next episode, we will have John Trainer as our special guest. We'll talk about Windows Mobile 6.x, and that whole thing. And then the wheels start to wobble off the axles a little bit. At that time period,
a little bit.
But let's not overshadow that too much. But I thought it was a really good episode, and for those that have their Motorola Qs and their Blackjacks and all that good stuff, those are cool devices, and it's a good
time. Absolutely, it's good stuff, man.
All right, well, why don't we wrap this one up, and we'll see everyone for episode 4.
Awesome. Adios.
All right. See ya.